Hello everyone, how are you going? Welcome to 6 things that surprised me after moving to Canada. Something that is not outrageous to hear. You know, every single country in the world, if you're moving there, is going to have a level of culture shock. But I feel as though out of all the countries in the world, Canada is definitely up there in terms of the golden countries where nothing can ever be wrong.
Culture shock. It's real, it's inevitable, and it's completely normal. You may not see it in the first few days or weeks after you arrive, but it might creep onto you and even take you by surprise. I suppose there are just some things about being a newcomer that will take some getting used to. So here are 6 shocking, or rather odd things that I learned after moving to Canada from the Philippines.
Oh wow, that is a big move. I wasn't entirely sure where she was going to be moving from, but wow, from the Philippines to Canada. I mean, that's even more so than, let's say, if I went to Canada, there would be less culture shocks going from Australia to Canada, from the US to Canada, from the UK to Canada, any of the truly Western countries to Canada, compared to so many different parts of the world, be it Asia or Africa, or I guess even Eastern Europe or the Middle East, for goodness sake. All of these places are going to have so many differences.
First off, climate.
Yes, definitely. Cold.
Number 1, apparently it's weird to carry an umbrella over your head during the summer. Back home, it's pretty common to use umbrellas rain or shine, but when I did that here in Canada, especially during the summer, I got a lot of weird looks. I guess because it only shines 3 months out of the year here in Canada, a lot of people tend to embrace the warmth and sunshine, and so wearing sunscreen, a cap, and a pair of shades would suffice. But an umbrella? Maybe keep that just for the rainy season instead.
Well, that one has absolutely caught me off guard, and I mean, especially to start with, but mainly because she started out that entire thing talking about climate, and so I just assumed she was going to be talking about, okay, it's colder, or it's snow, or things like that, not then carrying around an umbrella for shade purposes in the summer. I mean, you were definitely not crazy. It is absolutely a great thing to do if you can do it, but in the same sentence, I can also understand why Canada wouldn't exactly have it on the priority list of what to do. I guess in the same way that if someone was walking around on a bright sunny day just with a poncho on, they're going to be going, why? It's not raining, it's not wet, it's not even windy, it doesn't make sense. And so if the umbrella just means rain, then that's all it means.
Up next, time. Time zones here are pretty weird. Here in Vancouver, there's Pacific Standard Time, while in Ontario, there's Eastern Standard Time. But what's surprising to me is that there are 4 other time zones here in Canada. So if ever I wanted to catch up with a good friend in another province, for example in Halifax, I'd have to account for the time difference before setting up a catch-up date. On another note, let's talk about daylight savings. So it's basically the practice of adjusting our clocks twice a year, moving it 1 hour forward on the second Sunday of March and 1 hour back on the first Sunday in November. Which reminds me, it's coming up pretty soon. I never really had to change my clock and my body clock, but since the sun can still be out here at 9 p.m. in the summer and set at 3 or 4 p.m. in the winter, I understand why it exists.
Oh man, I can certainly understand what she is coming from, and I don't know, is daylight saving time something that the whole world does, or does all the equatorial countries not really bother with it because they don't change that much maybe? However, coming back to when she was talking about time zones, I'm mostly confused about that because, well, I mean, she wasn't complaining about it, but it definitely shouldn't take you by surprise, I would think, you know? Time zones are literally just, well, you have so many sections around the globe, and so when you have a big country, you're going to take up multiple sections. And so unless someone is thinking that Canada, the second biggest country in the world, is only going to be 500 kilometers across, then I really don't see how you can be shocked by that. I mean, maybe I'm just biased because I know that Australia is a big country and then Australia also has multiple time zones as well, but come on, like, that's just what time zones are. I mean, it is kind of a subtle flex for you to be having so many friends that this is even a problem in the first place, but hey, I guess if you're just not used to it yet, and I guess she didn't actually say how long she has been here, but surely it's just not that big of a problem once you just go, okay, 2 hours, done.
Up next, money. One thing you should know is the tipping etiquette in Canada, or Vancouver to say the least. Here, it's expected to tip a minimum of 10%, but 15 to 20% would be ideal. So if you're ever dining out with friends and it's time to split the bill, just make sure to account for the cost of the meal, the taxes included, and the tip. On another note, one of the biggest shockers for me is finding out the cost of living here in Canada. I would always compare how much things cost here versus how much they cost in the Philippines, and I'd always get surprised by how big the price difference is. For example, 100 pesos or a little over 2 Canadian dollars would get you a decent meal in the Philippines. Like, we're talking about a full meal with rice and drinks. But here in Canada, a basic meal would probably run you up $7 to $10.
Oh, even then it's cheap. I mean, I guess they're a little bit closer to the US dollar, but God, even that's cheaper compared to Australia, for goodness sake. I mean, of course, if you are looking at getting fast food, then there can be some cheaper options, but honestly, I think the cheapest lunch that I've ever really thought about is maybe $10. I mean, Oh, what else could you get? Maybe like an $8.50 banh mi or something like that? I really don't know. What would you possibly be getting for under $10? Especially as she was talking about getting a full meal with rice and a drink, and so I'm trying to think what would an equivalent be. I mean, maybe if you were going to a shopping center and getting Indian and getting a butter chicken or 2 curries or something like that, then and a drink as well, so you're probably looking at paying like $18.
In the first few months of living here and discovering how much it costs to eat out, I would guilt trip myself whenever I order food outside, but
Yes.
I had to remind myself that relocating to a new country means subjecting myself to a new standard of living.
Yeah.
It was also in Canada that I learned about credit cards. Back home, I was more used to cash transactions, and while I did have a credit card, thanks mom, I would only ever use it for emergencies. So when
Nice.
it came time for me to apply for my own credit card here in Canada, one helpful advice that I got from family and friends is to really look at the credit card rewards or benefits and choose one that suits your lifestyle.
Yeah,
Don't
right.
just look at the student packages, although that is a good start, but really look into the rewards or features, because if you're going to be spending a lot of money living here, you might as well get the most out of it.
Fair enough. All sound advice as long as you were living within your means and treating the credit card almost more like a debit card so you don't overreach yourself and just end up in a pile of debt. I mean, yeah, the rewards can be good, but it's definitely not worth it. Not over a long term, not at, I don't know, what would it be now, 25% or something ridiculous on some of these cards? Either way, it would be a major difference to go from a cash-based economy to all of a sudden just using credit cards, or everyone using credit cards for everything. And look, even though I am still blown away by her $2 meal, I'm now wondering what is the income disparity between these two countries, because, well, it is so rarely talked about. But if you're making 4 times as much and food is costing 4 times as much, then it's 1-for-1 ratio. It doesn't make any difference. It's just like, oh, the number's bigger, but on both ends of the equation.
Up next, let's talk about people.
Right, here we go. This will be interesting.
One of the first things I noticed when I moved here was that a lot of Canadians engage in friendly small talk. Back home, we're
Okay.
usually to ourselves and rarely engage in small talk, but here I had to learn the art of reciprocating while keeping it brief and casual. Another thing about people here is that they tend to be very straightforward and pragmatic. People aren't afraid to speak their mind, even if it seems brutally honest or direct. I've grown to appreciate this over time, but it may come off as a surprise to other people the way it did to me.
I always find this kind of commentary so interesting because it is the most subjective thing in the world. There's no numbers you can point to. There's none of that. You can literally just go, okay, what I knew before and what I'm experiencing now, and that is it. And I also find it interesting in relation to Canada because, well, for one, they're always like the kind of the meek and mild USA. And so for her to be going, oh, I moved here and all of a sudden I'm just a bit overloaded. Like imagine if you went to the USA instead. Whew, you wouldn't know what hit you. Especially given the fact that the Canadian stereotype just talks about them being so friendly and not wanting to offend anyone, and meanwhile they're just going, hang on a second, you've just been a little bit too blunt, and I've taken not offense to that, but it's definitely a little bit rude or just forthcoming with your words. And so by no means is it a criticism of what she is saying, or of Canada for that matter, but either way it is just so interesting, all the different worldly perspectives. But here we go, this is exactly what I was looking for, because I feel as though the population density of a country, especially when you're dealing with such a massive country like Canada being the second biggest, and then all the way down to the Philippines being a high density living area, can just change how a person interacts with people, because if you were to interact with every single person that you would come across, you wouldn't get anywhere ever.
Up next, let's talk about food.
Here we go. Where's this poutine? Bagels, yes.
When I started making friends here, the first meal that people would recommend I try is poutine. I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw it, it didn't look as appetizing, but after that first bite, I was immediately hooked. So looks can be deceiving, but this one actually turns out for the better. Another notorious food item here are ketchup flavored chips.
Yep.
Ketchup. To
All
be honest,
dressed.
not my fave. It's really hard to top barbecue flavored chips, but if you like trying new things, you can add ketchup flavored chips to your list. And
There they are, the all dressed. I spotted them. Come on, show me the money. There they are, all dressed, all season. There we go. Old Dutch. I've never heard of that brand before, but I've definitely heard of both of those flavors and understand the kind of cult following that they have up in Canada. I mean, to be fair, speaking of cult following, for goodness sake, poutine is absolutely like the A1 named meal up in Canada, which actually I saw for the first time ever in Australia. I've never seen it before, but I saw it on a stall that sadly wasn't open yet, so I couldn't ever get some. But geez, like you said, it does not look appetizing whatsoever. It's just so monochromatic. The gravy certainly does not help in that regard, and look, it just looks unhealthy, I guess because it is unhealthy, but that can often be just the tastiest things that you get addicted to like she did.
And finally, the Vancouver sushi scene here is
Interesting.
phenomenal. And pair that with a local craft
Whoa,
beer,
what is that?
bada bing bada boom, you got the winning combo.
Wait. Before you go too much further, what were those sushis? Look at that, they're huge. I mean, yeah, she's zoomed up, but what are they? Australia also has a decent selection of sushi, and I have never seen anything like that before. I mean, wow, fair play. That looks pretty darn delicious.
Last but not least, let's talk about transit.
Right. Good or bad? Probably bad. Skytrain. Clean. Nice.
One of my first worries about coming to Canada was how to get around the city via public transit. I honestly thought that I would need to allot at least 2 hours to get from home, school, or work.
Wow.
But to my surprise, I would only ever need 30 to 40 minutes to get around the Metro Vancouver area.
Yeah.
And that's because the transit system in Canada is so organized and is so efficient.
Okay.
To this day, I still prefer to take the bus or train because of the convenience it offers.
Right.
That, and because I also suck at driving here. Which reminds me, if you plan on driving in Canada, especially in BC, booking a road test here is so challenging. Like, you would need to book 6 months in advance or be on standby if ever someone forgets or cancels their appointment.
Wait, that's just confused me entirely. Wait, oh, does her license not transfer over? I mean, I guess that kind of makes sense. I can only imagine that the Philippines probably drives on the same side because there aren't too many countries that drive on the left side of the road. I mean, of course, there are other factors that come into it, and so for her to say, I just suck at driving here, fair enough. If that's what you're going to be doing and you just want to be catching the bus and the train everywhere and it works, then more power to you. Absolutely go for it. I was surprised, however, that she thought it was going to be taking 2 hours to be getting anywhere. Like, God, 2 hours to be getting anywhere? That is insane. I don't know what it is like in the Philippines, but please tell me that it's not 2 hours to be getting around the city. I mean, I understand that the organization of a rail network in particular, especially over buses, is going to make a massive difference. You know, let's say even in Sydney we have double-decker trains, and just take Japan for instance, that's how the entire city moves. Like, it doesn't operate without the rail network. And so for her to be saying that it is actually a well-organized system is definitely good to hear and definitely makes sense. I mean, it definitely isn't going to be the most expansive thing, be it Australia, Canada. We're just too big to make it efficient in the rural settings.
Lastly, I also learned that I had to unlearn a lot of the habits and practices that I got accustomed to back home in order to be a better driver here in Canada.
What?
So, long story short, take your driving lessons. It'll help out a bunch.
Oh, like what? What possible things? I'm just trying to think. I mean, there are so many different possible things it could be, but I wonder if there's one thing in particular that she can enlighten us with. I mean, I am interested to know, what is it going to be saying? Driving, that recognize, okay, let's just see. First one, oh, Australian, what? Sure. Interesting, Quebec is not actually on this list in terms of recognizing the Australian driver's license. I mean, with those 6 provinces, you do cover a lot of the greater Canadian landmass, but still the fact that Quebec is just doing its own thing like usual. But hey, this was a great video that just covered so many different aspects and things that caught me off guard, like umbrellas in the sun and time zones, for goodness sake. You know, things that people generally don't think of when they are migrating or even just visiting a different country. You go, hang on a second, these are actual different cultural differences and cultural shocks. And in that regard, like I've said before, I just always find these videos so interesting because you get that raw, unfiltered, just cultural differences from around the world that really does make us who we are. But anyway, in saying that, I reckon I am just finally going to call it there. So thank you for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, feel free to the algorithmic things down below. Also, if this is the first video of month that you are watching, then make sure to go check out my other videos. Also, make sure to go check out the original video down in the description below, or hey, maybe even just want to consider subscribing so that you don't miss another one of these in the future. But all in all, have a good one and see ya.